Hey there, everyone. It's Kelly from Kelly's Astrology here. I'm an astrologer. I teach, I consult with clients. One of my great joys is to help you learn astrology so that you can understand yourself and that you can help guide others. I put a shout out via the community page here on YouTube asking what kind of videos you were interested in. And so many of you wrote back about wanting more information on Mars in Aries. So what I'm going to do today is present just a short summary of some of the main highlights of Mars in Aries over the next 6 months. Of course, Mars is going to be in Aries for the entire second half of 2020. So this is one of our signature events for 2020. And I'm going to break down not so much, we're going to talk a little bit about the general Mars in Aries vibe, but what I want to do is break down some of the different qualities or pieces within that longer cycle. Mars is going to be retrograde for part of this time. Mars is going to be forming different aspects for part of this time. And so even though there's that sort of long 6-month Mars in Aries, it's going to feel different at different points depending on exactly what Mars is doing. So we'll break down a few of those key points here. One thing I do want to mention is that a lot of what I'm sharing today is actually info that I shared via a blog post on my website. So I'm going to link to that below. You're going to get all the highlights and the main juicy bits of that blog post in the video. But if you want more or if you'd like to read things over as well, that blog post will be a great resource. So a couple of key points. Usually Mars spends 6 weeks in one zodiac sign. So when Mars is moving at normal speed and traveling as usual around the zodiac, he spends about 6 weeks in a zodiac sign. So Mars spending 6 months in Aries is highly unusual, but it does have to do with Mars spending part of that time retrograde or moving in reverse. So it is unusual to have Mars in one sign for such a long period of time. Mars is a hot, dry planet, and Aries is a hot, dry sign. So we're getting this double combination of heat and dryness. Now, there are some challenging things about excess heat and dryness, but there will also be some productive things about this combination. Heat is activating and stimulating. And so if you've been dealing with a lack of motivation or a sluggish quality, Mars in Aries is great for transforming that. Mars in Aries gets you motivated, gets you fired up. It can get you willing to take action and move forward. One thing that too much of that heat can do is it can overstimulate. So you can get pushy or impatient. You can get frustrated with delays. It's like the heat is so stimulating and it's really designed for energy and activity that when we don't get activity fast enough, we can get angry. So it's a spectrum of what we do with that heat. Heat is about movement, about action. It's also about decision making. So there's that kind of desire that is stirred by Mars in Aries. Dryness is a separative quality. So dryness is about making space. Now, many of you who followed my videos for a while know I love to bake. I love to get in the kitchen and make all my gluten-free sweet treats. But even in gluten-free baking, just like in regular baking, you need a certain amount of moisture for things to bind together. You always know that you've forgotten to put the milk or the eggs or the coconut oil in if something is very crumbly after it comes out of the oven. And so that dry crumbliness is what happens when we get an excess of dryness. We get things coming apart. Now, if you've been in a codependent relationship, for instance, coming apart can be a really good thing. So whether coming apart and separateness is good or bad is contextual. It depends on the circumstances. If you're trying to collaborate with a colleague, coming apart is not going to be helpful. So whether the dry, separating quality of Mars in Aries is helpful or not depends on what you use it for. So here's a few ideas. Distance can be healthy. We need a little bit of space to stay in touch with our own ideas, to clarify our own feelings, and to be able to make choices that are in our own interests. So in therapeutic terms, we often talk about healthy distance, being able to step back from something that you can get perspective on it so that you're not consumed or swallowed up by it. So that's where separateness can be good. Oh, yeah. The other thing I'm looking at my desk, which is not an example of a dry desk right now. It's an example of a wet desk because it's got papers that are very disordered all over it. You can't see it on camera, which is the beauty of doing things on camera, but that's what it looks like. A dry desk is an organized desk. Everything has its place. Everything is neatly ordered and carefully arranged. So that separating quality of dryness allows things to become more organized, more structured, and more ordered. So dryness has a productive and practical place. I'm trying to put those words together. So with an excessive amount of dryness or separating energy, we can get isolated. And of course, that's a huge concern for all of us right now. So if you are feeling isolated, which is a symptom of excess dryness, we need to bring wetness in. Wetness can be hydration, but wetness in an experiential or psychological sense is connectedness. So it's being on the phone with someone, jumping on a video chat. It's about staying in contact. So we want to think about the fact that we've got an excess of this heat and dryness with Mars in Aries, and we can use heat and dryness to do good things, but we have to be cautious and watchful for the problems of an excess of heat and dryness. So there's a few pieces there. Now, Mars in Aries is very specific. Cardinal signs are goal-oriented, and so Mars in Aries has some specific targets or outcomes that he wants to achieve. And as we explore the cycle of Mars in Aries, we're going to get a sense of whether Mars is going to get what he wants or not. Now, Mars is in Aries for 6 months. The first little bit of that cycle, really up until the end of July. So really Mars in Aries in July is decent. Mars isn't suffering too much and he's moving at a decent rate of speed. So July 2020 is very much about connecting to the Aries part of your birth chart, getting familiar with what the topics and the goals are around that part of your life. And one of the specific things about this particular Mars in Aries is balancing short-term goals with longer-term outcomes. So normally Mars in Aries is about getting in, getting things done, and moving on. This time around, because of both the retrograde and the special relationship Mars in Aries is forming with Saturn in Capricorn, we are going to need to pace ourselves and do some self-regulation to make sure that we're not all about immediate gratification and we are working consistently towards something with a longer term goal. So Mars in Aries in July is a chance to kind of remind yourself of what the Aries house and topics are all about in your birth chart. I do recommend that you use the whole sign house format for identifying the topics of your Aries house. I have another video called Why I Use Whole Sign Houses, which can be worth checking out. It's very good for these topic-specific interpretations from our chart. So I would recommend a whole sign house format version of your chart or an equal house version of your chart. They're going to come at that from the same way to identify the topics of what Mars in Aries is triggering by house for you personally. So then we come into late July, which is when Mars crosses 15 degrees Aries. Now, this is Mars entering his shadow zone. 15 Aries is the point that Mars will station direct at the end of his retrograde in November. So once we get to the end of July, Mars is still going okay, but he's now in that shadow retrograde zone, and we're going to start seeing things get a little bit more shaky and a little bit less, clear. Mars in August starts to make some of the square aspects that he's going to make, and that includes a square to Jupiter and a square to Pluto. They are important aspects in the context of Mars in Aries, but I'm not going to touch on them in this video today. To my mind, they're not the most important and they're not the most problematic aspect that Mars in Aries is going to experience. They are important, but just to keep this at a reasonable length, I've left those out for now. But just to let you know, they are happening, they are worth looking at, they are going to flavour what's going on in August. The most important aspect to my mind, to my interpretation as a sort of Hellenistic ancient astrologer, is the Mars square Saturn aspect. This kicks in around August 13 and will run until October 11. I'm using a 3-degree orb for this aspect. So the timeline I've given you is when Mars is within 3 degrees of exactly squaring Saturn. It's a really long time. It's about 6 or 7 weeks. When I gave my year ahead trainings back in January, this was one of the timeframes, one of 2 timeframes that I identified as being some of the most difficult for 2020. So Mars square Saturn is an aspect of frustration. It's an aspect of thwarted will, where you want to do something, but you're hitting roadblocks, you're hitting distractions, you're getting pulled off course, you're getting delayed. Bureaucracies or standards or somebody else's something is kind of interfering with your ability to move forward. So I'm thinking there about the symbolism of Mars in Aries trying to power along and Saturn in Capricorn being roadblocks or governments or bureaucracies or some other type of sort of large institutional or very demanding undertaking that is just going to require every ounce of effort you've got to try and navigate or circumvent. So this is really the peak of the most frustrating part to my interpretation of Mars in Aries. Now, the reason this square lasts as long as it does is that Mars is slowing down. So is Saturn, but the slowing down has more of an impact on Mars's speed because in the middle of September, Mars will actually begin its retrograde. So Mars's retrograde starts on September 28th. Mars will be at 28 degrees Aries, still in that square angle with Saturn, but now Mars doesn't even have any pace or momentum. Mars retrograde runs from September 8 to November 13. And in that time, Mars will backtrack from 28 Aries to 15 Aries. So the Mars retrograde is really activating the second half of the zodiac sign of Aries. If you have planets or angles like your ascendant or midheaven in the first half of Aries, they're relatively unscathed, we might say. Mars is going to transit over them just once, but the Mars retrograde zone is 15 to 28 Aries. If you have planets or angles between 15 and 28 Aries, you're going to be more directly influenced by the Mars in Aries retrograde, and that's going to require a little bit more patience to deal with those delays or frustrations that will be much more likely to do with the topics of any planet or angle that you have between 15 and 28 Aries. So we've got the Mars square Saturn, and so I'm just going to read a short passage about this. I've said it's about frustration, and it describes the experience of your efforts being challenged, delayed, or thwarted. This can feel like hitting a brick wall or coming up against a restriction or a limit that holds you back or delays you. And you may expend great effort for very little results during this time. A colleague of mine, Nina Griffin, has also put some videos out on Mars square Saturn. I recommend you check out her and her channel. She described the Mars square Saturn as a siege aspect, and I think that's really appropriate. What this is informed by, and this is the final piece to share about Mars and Saturn, is that Saturn has a dominating influence over Mars. And there are two technical factors that play into this. Saturn is the superior planet relative to Mars, which is indicative of him really, influencing and affecting Mars. That Mars kind of has to bow down to whatever the style of doing things Saturn wants to bring through. But in addition, relative to Mars in Aries, Saturn in Capricorn is in the 10th house position, which is known as the overcoming or dominant aspect position. And so Saturn is really pressing down on Mars. And this is a clue that even though Mars is very strongly placed in Aries, in the battle of this particular Mars-Saturn aspect, when Mars is placed in Aries and Saturn is placed in Capricorn, Saturn is going to be the winner. So Saturn is that longer term, larger kind of, whether it's institution or government, it's sort of that sense of the Mars in Aries is trying to refresh things or do things differently or push for change. And Saturn is that sense of like, you're going to have to be strategic. There's no quick win here, long term versus short term. And so right now, your efforts have to find this sweet spot between doing what's essential for today versus putting energy and effort into outcomes that will have long-term payoffs. And so there's a real sense of managing timing and pacing. Mars in Aries is fast and prefers immediate results. Saturn in Capricorn is really not thinking about this month or even this year. Saturn in Capricorn is thinking about the next decade. And so there is some tension there. Some of the tension we're all going to feel as a result of this Mars square Saturn aspect is that tension between what you want now and what you're prepared to wait for in the future, or what you're prepared to work for that you won't be rewarded for until down the track. A couple of really short phrases or sayings to keep you, to kind of soundbite this. The second half of 2020 is a marathon, not a sprint. So you have to pace yourself. Don't burn out in the first few weeks. Think about a little bit over long time rather than, not sleeping for 48 hours to get this immediate deadline or fix. The other cliche kind of phrase that is so appropriate for this, maybe not a cliche, but a little motto or saying, short-term pain for long-term gain. What are you prepared to go without now so that you can get something that is more sustainable or substantial as an outcome in the future? So you can see a lot of this Mars-Saturn action, both with the sign-based relationship, which is ongoing for the entire 6 months, but also specifically in that degree-based square angle, which the dates for that again were August 13 to October 11. It's very much about questions to do with immediacy versus future. The more that you're able to self-regulate, the less you can give in to your impulses, the more you're able to keep your eye on the long-term prize, the better you're going to weather the Mars-Saturn astro weather over the next 6 months. So as I mentioned, this is just a brief overview of the highlights of Mars in Aries. After Mars goes direct on November 13, it is starting to move forward through that second half of Aries with less of the drama. Mars and Saturn continue to be in that sign-based relationship until about mid-December, which will be when Saturn actually leaves Capricorn and moves into Aquarius. So late December, we have a couple of weeks with Mars in Aries without the interference of Saturn in Capricorn, which will be lovely. And it may be that sense of really hitting a goal that you've been working towards with Mars in Aries that you couldn't maybe get a sense of that progress while Saturn was in Capricorn, putting that pressure on Mars. There will be further aspects between Mars and Jupiter and Mars and Saturn. So they do continue throughout the second half of Mars and Jupiter and Mars and Pluto is what I wanted to reference there. Mars and Saturn will make a third square angle. There's technically 2 by degrees, one late August, one late September, but I've given you that whole window where Mars is within 3 degrees of Saturn, which is a real sort of power orb according to ancient astrologers. But once we get to early 2021, Saturn's in Aquarius, Mars is in Taurus, they do make a third square. It'll have a different tone and quality because both planets will be in different signs. So I'm going to leave that one to talk about till we get closer to it. Hopefully this gives you some insight and a bit of understanding of the different pieces and certainly that very very intense period to watch out for with Mars square Saturn in August, September, and early October. If you have more questions about Mars in Aries, feel free to pop them in the comments below. If you liked this video, do be sure to like the video itself, hit subscribe so you make sure that you never miss a future video. Take care, team. I'll be back with more soon. Bye for now.